Oh, good to see you. I'm excited. Yeah, you provided it in advance because I've been able to give it to Bill, who's sort of here, and he's also up there. So hopefully there'll be no hassle. Yeah, guess what? Oh, he said it was actually right. Yep. You have to go to the display option and you duplicate. So you can set it over. Yeah, just in case I forget. And then you Thanks a lot. I think we've solved it, but in case we haven't.
I think this is probably a better quality.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just press on there now.
Yes. Well, for me, it's well, you say they should, because the Johnson is here. I don't know. There should be no funding on
Hi. Exactly
Let it know about it.
That's an agency, so the other side. And then but if we hand back as all the studies from there, so well, that was the DA. I'm on board, but the exciting thing, the really exciting thing You know, you go around the master plan, and that's
Oh, really? Can everyone hear me? We're all on YouTube at the moment, so if you all come and sit down, please, because we're going to start on time, or just a minute later. So thank you all for coming here tonight. I'm Maria Fatsius, the chair of the Inner South Canberra Community Council, and we've got about 50 people, I think, were registered to attend tonight, but I think in fact we might have more than 50 people in the room. And in addition, we have people, excuse me, could we have silence in the room? And in addition, we have people watching on YouTube, and people on Facebook will be able to click onto the link in YouTube as well. Out there, also in for people watching on YouTube or Facebook. And to start off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting, and their elders past, present and emerging. We have some MLAs in the room at the moment. We've got Mark Parton, the Shadow Housing Minister, and I think we're waiting for Elizabeth Lee, who apparently is held up at another meeting, and so we look forward to Elizabeth joining us. We also have received apologies from Housing Minister Yvette Berry, Minister for Homelessness and Housing Services Rebecca Vassarotti. Rebecca was going to come, but she had to attend another meeting that's on tonight as well. We've got apologies from Peter Kane and Minister Shane Rattenbury, Melissa Bennett, convener of the Rental Residents Group, Gary Kent, our former chair, and Adish Chauhan, our Public Relations Officer. I'd like to, right at the outset, thank Bill Hill, who's helping us by running the audio, visual and streaming technology for our meeting tonight. We lost our usual guru on such matters, and so we've been sort of very lucky that at our last meeting we had the chair of the Gungahlin Community Council helping us out, and this time we've got Bill Gemmell, who's the chair of the Western Creek Community Council helping us out. So we do work together, and you know, we're training ourselves up so that we can run the audio, visual and the streaming ourselves for the September forum. And the meeting is being recorded so that if for some reason the internet connection is down, the recorded version will be uploaded to YouTube and shared on Facebook and the link placed on the ISCC website. So just bear that in mind if you're asking a question, that most probably, you will appear on YouTube or whatever. Although it is being filmed from the back, and so mostly people will see the heads of the audience. I ask that in the 2 Q&A sessions tonight, you're succinct in your questions so that we can give more people a chance to have a say. And if you've already asked a question, I'll give preference to someone who hasn't asked one yet. We've got a very good lineup of speakers. We've got 6 speakers, and we're going to start with our speaker on planning for Eastlake, which was going to be at the end of our program, but because there are 5 speakers on social housing issues, we thought we'd bring up the Eastlake speaker first, because I think she has other family commitments after this. And it's a full agenda, and I'll be insisting that speakers limit their presentations to 10 minutes so that we have enough time for questions and answers. And feel free, audience, to call me out if you think I'm falling down on the job. And our speakers are tonight Abelia Tate, Director of Tate Network, who's speaking about the place plan and planning for Eastlake. And then on social housing issues, we've got an all-star cast. We've got Jeff Aikner, Executive Branch Manager, Housing ACT, Dr. Emma Campbell, CEO of the ACT Council of Social Service, John Stanhope, the former ACT Chief Minister, Khaled Ahmed, Institute of Government and Policy Analysis, University of Canberra, and a former senior ACT Government Treasury official, and David Denham, President of the Group of Narrabundah Community Association. So after that, we're going to have Q&A. So the first Q&A of about 10 minutes, 15 minutes will be after the first speaker on Eastlake. And then after the social housing speakers, we'll have about 30 minutes for Q&A. So we really are going to try to keep everything to time. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Abelia to come and speak. And I can run this for you if you like.
Yeah, that's it. Hello everyone, hi. My name's Abelia, I'm the Director of Tate Network, and we're the lead consultancy for the project that we're here to talk to you about tonight, which is the Eastlake Place Planning Project. And thank you to ISCC for fitting us in on a packed agenda tonight. I've got 10 minutes and I'm going to do my best to stick to it. But I'd like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as Canberra's first inhabitants and traditional custodians. I recognise the special relationship and connection that Ngunnawal people have with this country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country we are meeting on today, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and future. And I welcome, of course, any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are in the meeting, either with us in person or online this evening. So we might just go to 2 slides. So we're a little bit of a big team on this job. We're a very diverse team of specialists, so we have a range of local practices and also national practices working on the job. Some of the names you'll hear working alongside EPSDD, Network, Lockbridge, Yerbay and Thunderstone are working with us, Hillfellas and Right Angle Studio. They are the core team, and we also have a supporting team of sub-consultants. And together we bring to the project expertise in planning, Indigenous collaboration and engagement, urban design, landscape architecture, placemaking and community and stakeholder collaboration. And we also have specialists in environmental heritage, engineering and economics. So we are a large team and it is a big job that we're embarking on. We go to the next slide, please, Maria. So a little bit about the context. Eastlake is situated within Ngunnawal country first and foremost, and it's located, as we all know, near the Canberra City and the Canberra Airport on the southeastern edge of Lake Burley-Griffin. So the site covers parts of Kingston, parts of Fyshwick and parts of Griffith, and it includes the Canberra Railway Station, the Mildura Street Industrial Commercial Area, and the growing Canberra Avenue east-west linking the capital with Queanbeyan. The site is immediately bounded by Kingston Foreshore, Jerrabomba Wetlands and Canberra Avenue, and it's a site of about 100 hectares, so it's a very large piece of land. If we zoom in on the next slide, it is shown here in the red boundary, so that is our project area boundary. So Eastlake is very strategically located where the Canberra-Sydney Interstate Railway Station meets Canberra's rapid public transport services and the busy Canberra Avenue. And the area has been identified as a strategic urban intensification and regeneration precinct. We go to the next slide. We acknowledge and are aware that there has been a lot of work done on this project over the years, some of which was talked to me about when I first walked in the room. So the area was first identified for future urban intensification in the 2004 Canberra Spatial Plan, so it's been around for quite a long time. And since then, the Territory has undertaken a range of preliminary planning investigations in consultation with community and key stakeholders, which we're working our way through, having come onto the job. Eastlake is considered to be well positioned to contribute to Canberra becoming a more compact and efficient city, which is one of the aims of the Canberra planning strategy. The Eastlake preliminary investigations and studies undertaken in consultation with community and key stakeholders since 2004 have shown how the area could be renewed. The preliminary planning for Eastlake from 2007 to 2013 illustrated some of these plans, which many of you will remember, and it showed a mixed density, mixed use community between Jerrabomba Wetlands and Canberra Avenue. And that was obviously pending a range of further investigations. So land management and planning, there's major infrastructure there, remediation, because we do have the contamination, and transport management. Nonetheless, the ACT planning strategy identified Eastlake as an urban intensification locality, and you can see the extract there on the right of that plan. So the project, if we go to the next slide, is now positioned to finalise the planning to guide the future of this strategic location in collaboration with stakeholders and the community. And that is the primary objective of our project that we've been tasked with, to finalise the planning for the Eastlake precinct in collaboration with the community and key stakeholders to guide future urban renewal and regeneration. So a key output of our project is a place plan. If we go to the next slide. So place plans summarise and prioritise the local needs and vision for a place to ensure that it's sustainable and thriving into the future. And they're about a collaboration with community and stakeholders, and that collaboration is critical to delivering a place plan that envisions the proposed change. Next slide, please. So place plans articulate the character of an area. They talk about its history, its heritage and natural assets, its aspirations economically, environmentally, socially, culturally and aesthetically. So that's what we're setting out to do. The ACT government is working on a number of urban renewal projects across Canberra, and we want to deliver a sort of consolidated and coordinated engagement process across these projects. So Eastlake will feed into the Inner South District strategy as an area of future change. And the collaborations on this place plan will then inform the district strategy as well. The district strategy consultation is anticipated to commence late 2022, and the community will be given an opportunity at that time, again, to comment on the place plan, but also the district strategies. And obviously in your area, you also have the SLA Kingston Arts Precinct. So we are also seeking to collaborate with that project and come out to you in a coordinated manner across July and August. Next slide, please. So if you're wondering what a place plan is and what might be included, ACT does have many place plans in action at the moment, and you can access them online. If you go to the City Renewal website, City Renewal Authority website, you'll find many of them, but we've just put up here Dixon, Braddon and Acton waterfront, which will start to give you a bit of a flavour about what a place plan is and what we're producing. Next slide, please. So the project timeline, for us, we've just started, we're just kicking off. The first stages are about preparing this place plan and, importantly, talking to community and collaborating with you all in order to get your input into the place plan. We will then move on later to technical assessments and a planning report. And again, there'll be a consultation piece that goes alongside that. So this first stage of consultation that we've come to you to sort of talk about and let you know is happening is being undertaken now to inform the place planning and the place plan. And just to reiterate, the consultation for the district strategies will commence late 2022. If we go to the next slide. So we really want to work with the community to capture the identity, character and values of the Eastlake area. We want to hear about those connections to the area, as well as the aspirations and ideas for the future of Eastlake. So the idea of the place plan is it's going to bring together all these differing ideas from the Canberra community and the organisations. So we want to hear from the people who live, work and play in the area now and into the future. And of course, at the heart of our engagement process and place plan is the cultural and historic heritage values of the area, including the Ngunnawal people and country. So ongoing and early consultation with Indigenous representatives and groups is also being undertaken as part of this process. We go to the next slide. So this is the timeline for this first stage. The period is set to commence in late July and run until end of August. The consultation period will be launched by the Minister for Planning and Land Management, and that will formally announce the commencement of the engagement, which we're expecting soon. And the idea is really to come to the community and hear what you have to say about the area. So we're proposing to undertake trader door-to-door engagement. We'll be walking door-to-door with visitors. We'll be undertaking workshops on the site. We're also going to host a range of pop-up stalls, and we're working to put on a community event in collaboration with Jerrabunga Wetlands. And we're aware of the changing COVID situation, so some of this may need to be moved online dependent on what happens over the coming months. It's obviously a fast-changing area. If we go to the next slide. So we're just here to let you know that this consultation is about to commence. It will be up on the as a Your Say page, and we would really welcome you all to come there and share your stories about Eastlake, share your photos, take our survey, find out and register for our events, and also sign up to our email updates. And we will notify the ISCC of the dates when the consultation formally commences, and they will no doubt let you know. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for being right on time, Ophelia. Now we have about 10 minutes for questions, and so I might just see, are there any questions? I've got this bright light in my eyes, but okay, Paul, for Paul first, and then yeah, Beatrice. Hi, Beatrice. So,
thank you for your presentation. Two very quick questions. How many public housing dwellings do you estimate will go into the new Eastlake precinct? And the second question relates to traffic and commuting. Given that Wentworth Avenue and Canberra Avenue can't cope with the number of traffic during peak hour currently, how do you envisage traffic going to and from Civic and other parts of Canberra in the future?
I might defer the public housing question to our EPSDD representatives in the office, in the room, if that's okay. In terms of the traffic, I don't know about that at the moment. We do have traffic consultants on our team. They will be undertaking their studies and referring to the background analysis that's been done before. We haven't made it to that stage of the project, but we welcome the feedback that, you know, there is congestion and it's causing issues in the area at the moment. But we haven't done those formal studies at the moment. Yeah. Did you, Lynette?
Thank you, and thank you for your question. I think that if I can just check, that question was about how many public housing or social housing there will be in the new area. This is the planning process, so none of that's set at this time, but that's the sort of feedback we will be doing through this place plan, and to look at what will go there, what community facilities, what housing, what levels of housing, what different topologies, etc. So no real answer yet, but we're embarking on that planning process now.
Right, thank you. And Beatrice?
You mentioned the station. Are there any plans to update the train to Sydney? I mean, we do have a climate emergency, and it would save a lot of CO2 if people would have a fast, cost-efficient train instead of bus or airplanes going to Sydney.
Yes, the decisions around what happens with the rail to Sydney, I guess, are outside the scope of our project, but what we're looking at is how they can operate depending on those decisions that are taken. So we'll be looking at a number of different scenarios about reconfiguring the station, leaving it as it is potentially, what happens if it gets removed, what happens if the light rail gets if the fast train gets implemented. So there are a range of different scenarios that we will have to allow for in our planning. I don't have a decision about what is going to happen to the line itself will be taken as part of our project. So we'll be looking at how can we accommodate the changes as they happen into the future. And I completely agree with the premise that, you know, it's a fantastic proposition to have a fast rail between Canberra and Sydney.
Now we've got, Bill has seen a question come through from YouTube. Two questions from YouTube. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, amazing. Somebody out there is watching us. It's actually 10 people on right now. But first question, what zoning will apply in the East Lake development? RZ2, RZ3?
That decision is going to be taken as part of this process. So what we're doing is seeking to establish what does community want to see there, what type of future we'd like to see as a community in Eastlake. And then the technical assessments and the planning report is about undertaking the legislative changes required to enable that to happen. So there is no sort of starting point about what the zoning may or may not be.
The second question is, how much will we build to rent? I assume they're asking what proportion, not price.
I think that's the same sort of answer. We don't know. We're looking for the community's view on what should be included in Eastlake, what do people want to see here, and then we'll be seeking to shape a community that fits that need. So yeah, the sort of, you know, if people want to see build to rent in this area, it'd be good to hear that and to have it inform the place plan.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, yeah, John. And I think John's very familiar with the whole background to Eastlake.
Actually, my question relates to the information you provided of the Ngunnawal people consulted in relation to the plans. I was interested that late last week the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Rachel Stephen-Smith, apologised generally for the fact that other Aboriginal peoples within Canberra, including, I presume, those people that identify as Ngambri, weren't consulted in the initial treaty process. That process is now, I understand, been abandoned. I understand too that in a couple of weeks, a member of the Ngambri group of Aboriginal people will be formally undertaking the work of the country, the government, the federal parliament. I'm just interested in whether or not you have any plans to consult the Ngambri people and other Aboriginal peoples as well as the Ngunnawal people, most particularly, the Ngambri people who identify as traditional custodians.
Yes is the answer. So we have on our team, we have brought in specialist consultants from Yerbay and Thunderstone who are helping us design our engagement program to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That won't be limited just to Ngunnawal people. Of course, it will be engaging with all the nations. as they relate to the site. And then we will, through our heritage consultant, we're also consulting with the RAOs who are established in Canberra. And if there is another group that we need to engage with, we'll certainly be undertaking that, John. But at the moment, it's quite a big bucket. We're sort of going out there and trying to speak to as many people as we can. We aren't seeking to narrow it down or exclude anyone at all.
Right, we still have a couple more minutes. Anne, and then Peter, and over here. Oh yeah, hi, yeah, Grant.
So 1, 2.
1, 2, 3, and I think that will be it.
Do we have to use the?
Yes.
Especially
from down the back, it was a little hard to appreciate the diagram that you showed.
Yeah.
Will that all go online?
Yes, absolutely. Very happy to make the PowerPoint available and to put it up online.
Does it cover East Lake, what we all know as East Lake Causeway?
Yes, yes,
Right.
it does. Yeah.
And there are still public housing tenants at the Causeway?
Yes, there are.
Right, so I just want you to appreciate that the Inner South has had gouged out very significant public housing complexes in more than 3 locations. You're probably familiar with them.
Yes.
And at every public meeting that was held over the redevelopment of those sites, the general consensus was that there be a component of public housing back in the new complexes. That's not happening, and that's not what the community was requesting. So are you guaranteeing the public housing tenants that are in the Causeway a chance to come back to that site if that's what they want?
I'm not guaranteeing anything. I can't put my hand in my heart and do that, but I certainly am here to say that we're here to listen to what's important to the community and to ensure that that is embodied in the place plan and in the planning processes going forward. And if public housing is a key component of that, I will certainly be doing my best to document that and to carry that forward, but I can't personally guarantee anything.
As long as you appreciate that the general community has been requesting for years
Yes,
for public housing to remain in the Inner South.
yes, thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Yes, could I suggest that you incorporate a wildlife corridor going from Narrabunga wetlands to Currawonga wetlands
Yes.
through that area, because at the moment I believe there's a track, but I've yet to find it. There's a bit of a goat track apparently, but there's no wildlife corridor as such. So
Oh, that's great, thank you. We'll look into that. Thank you.
Maria, I'll try and do it without.
Oh, no, because the people on YouTube, you have to think of people also watching online.
I'm Grant Battersby from the Woodlands Wetlands Trust, and we thank you very much for putting us into the consultation loop early, because this and the almost concurrent development at Derry Road are going to put a lot of people pressure on a nature reserve. The policy of the ACT government for the Canberra Nature Park is that the nature parks are for human recreation and conservation of nature, with the second to take priority. We recognise the value of having an area of natural beauty and so on alongside housing for the benefit, the health, physical and psychological health of the inhabitants, and we welcome people to use the nature reserve, but this is going to be an ongoing balancing factor, and we look forward to further discussions with you on that.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Okay, I think that does the questions and answers. Thank you very much,
Thank you very
Amelia,
much.
for
Thank you
joining
very
us, and we look forward to you coming back when you're further on down in the process.
Thank you.
Thank
Please
you.
jump online.
Okay, now we've got our next, our 5 speakers on social housing issues, and I'd like to invite first Jeff Aigner. Do you pronounce it Aigner? Oh, good, that's lucky. Jeff is Executive Branch Manager, Housing ACT, and will speak to us about the growing and renewing public housing program. So hopefully the presentation will work because we had a few technical problems with the PDF, but anyway, let's see how we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope it sounds okay. Thank you for attending tonight and those of you online. And thank you to ISCC for making the time for us today. I look forward to some questions at the end. Before we go on to the kind of presentation, I'll just, a bit of background. Those of you who've been around for a while, this is not the first time we are renewing and growing the portfolio of public housing in the Territory. Many of you will remember that finishing in 2018, we ran a multi-year program that relocated 1,288 tenants, mostly out of the very old inner city multi-unit properties across Canberra. As soon as that program finished, or very soon after, we moved into the new program, which is called Growing and Renewing Public Housing. And I'm going to talk a bit about that tonight and a bit of an update on where we are with some of the processes with tenants. Next slide, please. So, how do we aim to... Well, yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Okay, sorry, we should have done that in PowerPoint around.
No, that's okay, we worked it out.
Okay, so in total we're adding 400 properties to the portfolio. So it's adding 1,400 and taking away 1,000. Let me just break that down for you. The additions, 700 new dwellings on demolished sites, 420 new dwellings on vacant purchased land. We're purchasing around 140 dwellings from the market, and there's another 140 we haven't quite worked out how we're going to do yet. This is a multi-year program, and we'll see how we go. We're taking 1,000 out of the portfolio, so selling around 700 dwellings and demolishing around 300. So if you look at the 300 down the bottom there, that's turning into the 700 on the top, where we're looking to better use the footprint of some of the properties that we have. Next slide, please. So, there we go. How are we going so far? We have engaged 662 households across the Territory. 360 have already relocated or are relocating right now over the 2.5 years that the program's been running. Unfortunately, our success rate has been less than 50%, despite us attempting a number of different strategies to engage tenants voluntarily into the program. And just a bit of background, so you understand the pressures that we're under in this program. We have over 4,000 people who are currently approved for housing assistance who are waiting on properties. So we're really keen to get the uplift in the portfolio to allow people to move into these properties. And probably most importantly, of those 4,000, 481 applicants are on the priority housing wait list. And they're people who are facing urgent, exceptional, critical need for housing. Next slide, please. So required relocations. This has been the fun bit that's been in the media a lot recently. And I don't say fun, with sincerity. It's been difficult. We're following 3 different phases over the last 2 years. The ministers agreed, both Minister Berry and Minister Vassarotti, to required relocation, so moving from a voluntary program to an involuntary program last year. To support us in that, we established what we call the Growth and Renewal Inclusive Partnership, which is made up of Atticus, Northside Community Services, Logan Community Services, Legal Aid, and Shelter. And they advise us on everything to do with this new process, including standard operating procedures, communications toolkits, involved in all the risk analyses. So that's an important part of this process. And we began communications with 320 tenants and the sector in February about required relocations. I should say at that point, all of those 320 tenants we had engaged with multiple times over the previous years when the program is still voluntary. The client profile. Next slide, please. So who are we talking about? 48% of tenants who are part of the program so far are over 60 years of age. 24% are over 70 years of age, 38% of women living alone, 25% women living with dependents, just over a quarter identified as having physical disabilities, 11% identified as non-physical disabilities, and 9% as First Nations people. So this is not an easy program to run. We're looking to meet the needs of these cohorts in their new locations, and I'll tell you about how we're doing that in a moment. And I should say this client profile of people who are in the program is not that different than the overall tenant profile in housing. So it's not like we are targeting any particular demographics in the program. Next slide, please. Where are we today? So overall, and this is as of last week, 720 tenancies have been referred to the program, although we may not have engaged all of those tenancies yet. 108 have agreed to relocate and are waiting for a property. We have granted 12 discretions or in-out-court exemptions, and there were people who we've looked at their circumstances and said, you don't have to be a part of this program. We have successfully relocated or are relocating 360 tenants, which is awesome. We're a third of the way through. We have issued no notices to vacate, and we evicted nobody today, and we don't aim to. Next slide, please. So, required relocations, how are we doing that? So there is significant support for this part of the program. We have dedicated tenant relocation officers. One of them's here tonight as well. I'm really pleased you're here. I think the team is at 6 at the moment. These are not housing managers. They're focused specifically on engaging with tenants to understand their needs through direct communication, phone calls, meetings, and support services to try and wrap around the tenant to understand what it is that they need to be able to move successfully to a new property, and if they need an exemption. The partners in the Growth and Renewal or GRIP partnership have also been supporting us through this process, and we've set up an operational group to work on specific tenants as well to work out what supports they need. This is a staggered approach and goes over many months, sometimes years, and there are multiple opportunities to relocate with choice. And we are trying to clearly demonstrate eviction as the last resort here. And if we go back to the previous program, we moved 1,288 people. We evicted one person, and they weren't a tenant. So we are trying to work really hard to get people to move to something that suits them. Discretions or exemptions may be sought based on age, different background features, personal circumstances, illnesses, and we also need to take into account what is the intention of the property. If one property is sitting among 3 properties, where we aim to redevelop all 3 and get an uplift in the number of properties we can get on that footprint, it becomes quite an important property. And we most recently set up a tenant relocation exemption panel, TREP, which began operating last month. Next slide, please. 1 minute. The exemptions process. I should say exemptions were an existing process. We already granted 9 exemptions before the panel was set up, but in consultation with GRIP and the Human Rights Commission, we developed a practice guide, set up a panel, and established what kind of membership it had, participation rights for tenants to turn up and say their piece, fact sheet, communication collateral, and all that's going up very soon. The first exemption panel met on the 16th of June to engage existing applications from April, so we haven't publicised it yet. We just had a bit of a backlog of people who were already looking for exemptions, and we were quite anxious to understand where they sat, so we've held 2 panels so far, and we engaged with tenants significantly around that process before they turn up at the panel. I should say that turning up at the panel, which panel you turn up to is your choice, so that's something we negotiate with tenants, and we always make sure the tenants have supports. That's it for me, Maria.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's certainly been very, it's been very useful to get that background about the program. And what we'll do is we'll have 5 speakers all speak. We'll have the Q&A at the end because we've got, another four speakers. So I think it is best if we hold off the questions to the end. So thank you, Jeff. And maybe we can get the 5 speakers up here afterwards. So thank you. And I'd like to now ask Emma Campbell to come to the front. And Emma and I haven't met before, so I'm really delighted, Emma, that we'll be meeting here tonight. Emma is CEO of the ACT Council of Social Service and is going to speak about vulnerability and injustice in a progressive jurisdiction. Thank you, Emma.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal people and paying my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. There is no fun in this process. There is no fun in this process. It has been a really terrible experience for everyone involved in it, including housing ACT. And here I'm talking about the Growing and Renewing programme. I understand why we need the Growing and Renewing programme. We have a shortage of around 3,000 social dwellings. Last year, more than 2,000 Canberrans each day were experiencing homelessness. And you saw the figures from Jeff with regards to the numbers of people who are trying to find homes. So I understand why there is an effort to try and fix this crisis. And it's getting worse. We know that over the last 10 years, there has actually been a decline in the absolute numbers of public houses in the ACT. A decline. So it's not that it's not growing as quickly enough to keep up with the increase in our population. The actual physical housing dwellings are declining. We have fewer social housing households than we did 10 years ago. And so that's why, in my view, there is a panic to try and fix what has become a real shame for the wealthiest jurisdiction in Australia when you look at median incomes. ACOS is quite interesting. We previously represented people who were income support recipients. We now find that we're also representing people in full-time work, people even in our sector, frontline staff, who are no longer able to afford housing without putting themselves into serious rental and financial stress. We have the highest rate of rental stress anywhere in Australia. And so it was actually a really uplifting feeling to hear in a room like this, people asking about public housing and what proportion of a new development will be public housing. Now, I wanted to talk about the challenges of injustice and poverty in a progressive jurisdiction, but it's very clear to me that there is a deep understanding of that in this room and within this council. And so I understand why there has been this drive through the Growing and Renewing programme to try and get as much revenue as possible, and let's be honest, that's what it's about, to reinvest in public housing. But the process has been terrifying for many of those involved. It's been unjust, it's lacked transparency, and it's caused deep distress to the majority female, older, disabled, or chronically ill tenants who have been impacted by this. I don't doubt that Housing ACT are operating with the best interest to achieve their goal. But there is often a real gap between what is happening in the offices of the ACT government and what is happening on the ground. And our frustration at ACOS has been the unwillingness of the ACT government to listen to the stories that we're bringing. The stories of one woman with dementia who received a letter even though she actually has a power of attorney, who had lived in her home for 60 years, had been promised that it was a home for life, had made all her life's decisions around that. With no access to support, she doesn't know who Canberra Community Law is. She wouldn't know how to call them. She doesn't know who ADICAS is. She spent the last 7 months in that home thinking that any day she was going to be forcibly removed from her home. Now that wasn't the plan, I understand that, but that's what happened to her. She fell and was found 24 hours after she fell and is now living in residential aged care. The last 6 months of her life in that home that she had lived in for 60 years was spent worrying that she would be removed from that home. She should never have received a letter. We know of many people with chronic health diseases, mental health issues, complex trauma-impacted histories. Aboriginal people whose land has already been stolen from them are now having their home forcibly. I feel there was a clear example that there was an exemption process before ACOS and Canberra Community Law went to the media. The exemption process was established only after, or the transparent exemption process was established only after ACOS and Canberra Community Law, with the help of the media, campaigned and shared the stories of these very vulnerable people. We remain very frustrated about the lack of consultation and transparency. You have seen some of the stories around the very first hearing where people were given 48 hours to either defer their hearing or attend, many of whom are unable to even contact their representatives till the morning in order to defer the hearing. Some people couldn't read the information that was being sent to them. People are visually impaired, there's low levels of literacy amongst this community. We found that some of the tenants are very afraid to actually get legal advice and support because they think that that will put them offside with Housing ACT. Our communities, amongst the community sectors that have been appointed as advocates, not a single extra dollar of resources has been given to anyone. We're expected to do this within the normal resources we have. Canberra Community Law has had perhaps a 50% increase in the workload. I would suggest that the tenant relocation officers are not bad people. They're doing their best, I don't doubt that. But in any circumstance, it is not justice that the person who is tasked with convincing a person home is also the person tasked with giving that person independent and honest advice. It's not possible. Because they will have to betray one side of their responsibility or the other. And frankly, if many of these individuals had been given independent advice, they perhaps would have decided to move because they would have turned to that person and said, what do you think? And when they had a trusted person saying, actually, I think there's some real houses out there, and there are, yeah, they would have trusted that person to go and gone and looked at them and taken some advice from someone that they trusted. Right from the beginning. It's been about the implementation. The final thing that I want to say is, one of the things that's thrown back at me as well, we need to sell these houses, we need to do this because there's people on the waiting list. That's true. But there are choices that you can make. Why is it in housing that you have to create the income by selling off what you already had, even if it leads to injustice? But you don't have to do that in climate change policy, or in education, or in health. It may mean that the ACT government has to make significant investments in public housing before they can recoup some of that money from when they do sell off some of the properties, and perhaps it's appropriate at a later stage. Yeah. But it's about choices. And as I say, as my title of it, and I go back to the title of my speech, it is about choices, and the choices of a supposedly progressive government to fix deep social injustices that we see in the ACT. And I think by growing and renewing housing programme, all of the choices so far have been very wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. And some pretty big issues there will be fleshed out further in the question and answer period. So thank you very much, Emma. And I'd like to introduce now John Stanhope, former Chief Minister. And John, I understand that you're going to speak about issues raised by the program of ACT public housing tenant eviction. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here this evening. I have to say I am a little out of touch these days, and I regret that I'm probably not as able as many other people that might have been invited to speak in detail about this particular issue, namely the eviction by the ACT government of a large number of long-term public housing tenants from their homes. In many instances, houses stay at call home for decades, and in which many of them had expected and indeed planned to live for the remainder of their lives. I do, however, have had a long-standing interest in housing in Canberra and all its facets, i.e. housing affordability, housing choice, public housing and community housing. And I do keep a broad eye on what's happening in Canberra in relation to housing generally. I also do have the benefit of the detailed analysis which my colleague Dr. Khaled Ahmed does from time to time in relation to all forms of housing in Canberra. I'm aware that Khaled will, following my short presentation, be presenting the most up-to-date data available on public housing in Canberra, a presentation which I'm sure will speak for itself. I'm also aware that in the last decade, as Emma has just recounted, in which there has been a period of and sustained population growth in the ACT of some tens and tens of thousands of people. And not only has the current ACT government reduced the total number of public housing units, it has similarly curtailed the growth of community housing. And because of the massive reduction in the supply of land for detached housing, the housing of choice for an overwhelming proportion of Canberrans, we've seen an exponential increase in the cost of land and housing and a concomitant impact on affordability, and I would assume an increase in homelessness. It's relevant, I think, of these remarks I'm about to make, but I disclose that I have been asked by two women, whom I know, subject to the evictions we're discussing tonight, to attend meetings scheduled by Housing ACT to justify the applications that each has made to not be evicted. In other words, I have two friends that asked for exemptions. So, to some extent, my interest in this matter is quite personal. Both of these women are in their 70s and have lived in their homes for over 30 years in one case and over 40 years in the other. Neither has a partner. The house is their home, their castle. The place in which they live is their community, a community which sustains them and is central to the quality of their lives. Each of them has been utterly devastated by the prospect of being forced to move. They're each adamant that their quality of life will be utterly destroyed, and neither believe that no matter the quality or standard of housing that they may be offered in exchange or its location, that their lives will never be as rich or meaningful as they currently are. They are, of course, not alone in that respect, or in thinking that. I'm also sure that no thinking resident of Canberra would be surprised to learn the very serious impact and implications this program of removals will have on so many more people like the two women friends that I referred to are seeking and who are facing eviction. I spoke to one of my friends this evening. She's made an application for exemption. There's a form with questions that applicants are invited to respond to. I'll just read a couple of the questions and the responses which my friend gave. What are the exceptional circumstances you, the tenant, will experience if required to move? Answer. If by chance I were to survive packing, moving and unpacking 41 years of residence, I would not survive being uprooted from my home and friendly environment. Having no sense of orienteering, I would become totally disoriented, would not even be able to retrace the steps. I would lose all the friendly support I currently enjoy, which is the only security I have, as most of my friends are much older than I. That is the ones who are still alive, and I have no family in Canberra. Uproot an old tree and it will die. The same applies to me. Having been kicked out of my home country when I was 8 years old, which nearly broke my parents and family, I cannot risk having to go through the experience again. What are the risks you, the tenant, is required to, if you, the tenant, is required to relocate? Will relocating cause significant harm to health, mental health, well-being, identity, independence, and or quality of life? Response: the risk is my death. Health considerations. Do you, the tenant, have any health conditions that may be impacted or worsened by relocation, e.g. mental illness, chronic or terminal illness, disability? Response: having at the beginning of a cataract in both eyes, I might very well lose much of my sight and my driving licence in the near future. I would not even be able to read the numbers of buses if I had to use public transport. As stated above, I fear I would not be able to find my way home. Otherwise, I'm fit and healthy, but for how long? This process is destroying me. I fear for my sanity. Are there any other circumstances you, the tenant, would like to include for consideration by the panel? When I was offered this house to live in, I was told it was for the duration of my life. I was very grateful for the opportunity it gave me to bring up my two children successfully. Nothing prepared me for this assault. Are protected and cannot be removed from that habitat. I am a human being and I would like to be treated as one. Yvette did, in her application for exemption, also make this statement. The location I live in is ideal regarding shopping and transport. I hop on my bike, takes me to Civic, Dixon or the tramway. Less than 100 metres away is a bus stop. I ask you, how can you possibly do better and place me in a location that you say is more suited to my needs? And in relation to the question, to provide details of any mental or other illness or circumstance related to health that might be relevant, she responded, please don't expect me to grovel and tell you how sick I am, how I need my doctor, my dentist, my psychologist or my psychiatrist to support me, because that would not be true. I am fit, but I am 74. No, I did not have a hip replacement. Neither do I have asthma or high blood pressure, nor are any of the ailments that seem to plague older people. In discussing her appearance, I raised this particular issue, the entreaty for her not to be forced to drop, her absolute determination not to act in an undignified way or to feel the need to grovel before a panel of public servants, please let me stay in my home. She told me that as far as she was concerned, it was deeply flawed, that there was no medical practitioner or person with any medical experience on the panel. So what was the point of the question? And secondly, she said It's like asking me to appear naked. Why should I be forced to reveal my health and my health status to these junior public servants? I was actually asked to speak about what issues I feel this program of removals raises. And there are, I think, a couple of significant issues. For me, it raises some issues about the state of the ISCC budget. I can't quite understand why it is that in order to meet a hard and fast promise which Labor and the Greens gave at the last election to increase the stock of public housing by 400 units of housing, they didn't at the time say, oh, and by the way, in order to deliver that 400 units of additional public housing, we're going to have to actually kick 360 people out of their existing public housing and put them somewhere else in order that we can sell that very valuable asset. And that is interesting, that all the houses, or the majority of them, are in the inner city areas, the inner north and the inner south, where the median house price is well in excess of $1 million. So these 360 houses probably are worth $400 or $500 million, a cool $500,000. I think it is an issue that in making that promise, neither Labor or the Greens felt the need to tell us, oh, and by the way, we won't be budget funding it, we'll be funding it from asset sales. So I think there are two other quite significant issues this raises for me. And I sometimes imagine, or try to imagine these days, when Yvette Berry and Rebecca Bazzarotti brought this proposal to the caucus table, and all Labor and Greens members sat around the table, and Yvette and Rebecca said, oh, we've got a proposal. We're going to, in order to meet our promise in the election campaign to provide an additional 400 units of public housing, we're going to actually knock down 360, or we're going to sell them. Isn't that a ripper of an idea? And I sit back and I think, what the hell did the rest of them think or say? Did they say, oh, yippee, what a great idea? Or did anybody in the caucus, did a single Labor member or a single Greens member say, oh, hang on, do you think we should be evicting 90-year-old blind women from their houses? Is that really what we stand for? And the second issue that it raises for me is I count letters to the editor. I do read them. I think this issue to date has attracted 3 letters to the editor of the Canberra Times. And I wonder what that says about us. Complacent, middle class, Canberra, with our houses, and I have a beautiful house, my private health insurance, and I have cashed up private health insurance. I don't have to worry about this. An issue for me, increasingly, in relation to issues around the state of public health and the Canberra Hospital, the state of public housing, the eviction of elderly, blind women from their homes, and almost lack, if it were not for Emma Campbell and a couple of others, the lack of response from the other 40.
Thank you very much, John. And yeah, very, very sobering. And I'd now like to invite Khalid Ahmed, Adjunct Professor at the Institute of Government and Policy Analysis, University of Canberra, and former Senior ACT Government Treasury Official, who's going to speak about public housing stock over time and performance and financial arrangements for the stock renewal. Thank you.
Oh, I know. It's Roosevelt.
Oh, it's happening now. Here we go. Yeah, I think it's fine.
See, those are two powerful speeches and presentations, and it's deeply disturbing what you hear. I'll just try and put some hardcore data on the screen and let you draw your own conclusions. Couple of can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. A few points, few declarations. Number one, I don't represent the university here. I'm here in my personal capacity. And number two, for the public servants here, I do understand where you come from, but I also know where you could come from. So that's the whole premise of my class here. Let's just start with the public housing stock, and Emma mentioned it and has been raising it for quite a while now with the hard numbers. Dwellings decreased between 2011 and 2021, so that's a 10-year long data, by 1.8%. Population increased by 21.8, about 22%, and the population figures are the latest ABS figures, so about 22% increase in population. So the relative to the population, we had a real decrease of about 19% over the 10-year period. I'll come back to it. Can I suggest that please place a bookmark on that number? About 11,063. Let's look at the public housing renewal program Mark 1. That was mentioned a moment ago. We had budget announcements. We totaled about 699 million. So starting from 2015-16 budget, and I'm drawing these out of the descriptive part of the relevant budget papers every year. So 133 million investment in public housing renewal in central locations over 4 years. Those are the exact words in the budget paper. 2016-17 budget, 156 million, 353 over 4. Let's make it 700 million committed over those years. Now, the interesting thing about budget is that the funding has to be approved by the Parliament, the Assembly, and housing ACT is a separate appropriation unit. So you can actually go to its annual financial statement and look at what money was actually allocated. That was about 81 million over those years, and I've added 2019-20 as well, years after the program was complete, because there was a commitment over the forward estimates. So this looks like the normal run-of-the-mill capital program. No money came in relating to the redevelopment and growing the housing stock. So there's a bit of a difference between the money and mouth. So what were the financial mechanisms of the program? I think it's interesting to know. Now, I think John has alluded to it. Sam did as well. By the way, this was quite an opaque program. It is very difficult to get a full picture on the program. You actually have to go to the annual financial statements and deep notes buried right at the end of those statements to figure out what was happening. There was no description in a single place of what properties were lost. The number lost was not there in the annual reports. I did a global search on those. So what I've constructed is, in each of these years, this is the property that Housing ACT is transferring over to Land Development Agency. About 222 million worth of property, essentially land, at the book value, was transferred over to LDA or SLA in later years. They develop it, sell it, take it to the market, do whatever. And there's no clarity on how those things were done.
to individual parcels of land. There were some deals where there was some handback of some dwellings. There's no clarity on that. Anyway, the financial statements do tell us that about 457 million worth of dwellings were transferred back. So net assets transferred back were about 235 million. Not 600 million, not 700 million. And we got about 1,094 properties back. That's the description in the notes, but we don't know what were the numbers lost. We'll get to that in a moment, or at least we have deduced those. So that's the financial mechanism of the program. The Housing ACT transfers its assets to a developer. It takes it to market, or does its marketing. Make some deals where some of the dwellings are handed back, and what happens to the value uplift, whether it is entirely returned to housing or not, there is no transparency about it. In fact, I don't think anybody could guarantee that all the value uplift was returned to housing. After all, it is a separate entity. Whatever goes out of it must come back to it. And whatever planning decisions were made to uplift the value of land, who should benefit from that? Housing, LDA, or the private sector? Those are the questions that must be asked but haven't been asked, and haven't been answered either. So what happened? What are the performance measures? You can go through productivity commission's data, 45 odd tables. I've just picked a few, and I've struggled to find anything good. But here are the relevant ones. You would imagine that these would improve after a program of redevelopment and renewal and 700 million investment into public housing. 2017, 11,077. Program end, you got a 2% drop in total dwellings. There's about 2.3% drop in household in public housing. Average turnaround time increases to about 50 days. Applicants on waiting list increases by about 63%. Proportion of overcrowded households increases. Now that 0.3% and 0.7%, they're not real numbers. Yep. I mean, if one got cynical, would say, well, you could have left it alone. Why do it? No, seriously. I mean, what has happened here is the financial structure of the program. The assets were taken out of the market. They were redeveloped out of it. There was no new money put in into the program, and that's what happens. So what is the calculus of evictions? I mean, and these are evictions that, there's no other word, by the way. It is somewhat disappointing to hear the word involuntary in a program. That should not happen. And then the suggestion that it moved from voluntary to involuntary, but we will not evict. Well, that's a contradiction. You either make it voluntary, and if it is involuntary, you are coercing people here. I don't know whether eviction is bad or coercion is even worse. For those who agree to it, what does it go through? I tried to look at the calculus of this. So this is Mark II we're talking about. The calculus of the eviction. Why? Because I've been asked this question so many times by my colleagues, or commented by people. Why would a government do that? Why would a government evict people? And a progressive government. And my thought is that on decency and ethical program design, it's not the prerogative of one government or the other. Everyone should do that. So the question is, why? So this is an extract from the letter that the two ministers wrote, and I think quite a few people in this room would have gotten it. And this is the only place, sorry, I'll take one more minute. This is an interesting point, where you see the calculus. So there's a mention of 20%, and we go to 40%. I mean, some of the text is a bit confusing. We go from 20 to 40, and I don't know, reading this text, and I'd be happy to be advised, whether 20 to 40 was once we made it involuntary, or whether we have to make it involuntary to go from 40 to something else. There's a target there, and there's a thing about viability. What is viability of a program that is, demolishing houses that are unlivable? What's the viability here? One has to ask the question, what is the purpose of invoking viability? If a house is unlivable, you rebuild it or you upgrade it. What's the viability? So that's the calculus. We've got a target of some sort. We want to achieve it. And because the financial model that we have has got dubious outcomes, we're happy to go through an unethical design of a program. There's no other word. Unethical design. That's the summary. I probably should stop here. Yeah.
But perhaps.
But happy to answer the questions later on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Khaled. And our final speaker is David Denham, President of the Griffith Narrabundah Community Association, who's going to speak about public housing in inner South Canberra and issues with the current system.
The mouse freezes.
The mouse is frozen, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can't breathe hot air on it. Okay. Well, the public housing issue in the South Canberra only became a really important issue. Well, it was always important, but it became a crucial issue in the last 10 years. And we put up some ideas about what we'd like in terms of public housing and what we've got. And the first thing, there's a few things up there. We like maintenance, proper maintenance of public housing dwellings. And what do we get? A lot of very poorly maintained properties. I know one, for example, where the whole front wall of the house has been removed. And it's been like that for several years. I mean, that really is not good enough. And we've got to treat residents as valued people, not pawns moved around a chessboard or from this place to that place so that you can build something here and keep the numbers up. And then we've got this supportive and adaptable housing. And the government decided to use supportive housing and brought it in because they could put more dwellings on a block. But in actual fact, from Jeff's talk, there's only 30% roughly of the public housing people are disabled. And supportive housing is supposed to be for disabled. But now everywhere, in our Z1 Emirates, all those buildings are supportive housing, that's what they put in. Because they can squash more in. The dwelling should blend in with the neighbourhood.
there shouldn't be eyesores for public dwellings. But what happens is they're squashing as many dwellings in the block as they possibly can. And then the development applications complying with they should comply with the territory plan. In actual fact, I don't know of one development application that's gone straight through and been approved. And I know one which had to be surrendered because they didn't prepare for the tenant there leaving and vacating the block. And there's a recent one which I'll come to here in Lockyer Street, where they've been going to and fro between housing and ACLA. Where's this? Where's that? So the standard there is substandard. And then we went into salt and pepper distribution of dwellings. Well, we get that in some areas, but we've got one area in Griffith where it looks as though there's going to be 70% in the street. And then there's the question that was mentioned earlier by whether you build on that block or whether you sell that block and build elsewhere. And there's total secrecy on that as to what the policy is there. And finally, consult and engage with the local community, because people in public housing, they're part of the community. They're not different people, but we get total secrecy from the government on this. It took us 6 months to get a meeting with housing to just discuss what the general policy was in the inner south. 6 months. And they said, no, we can't do this because it's all secret. But what's the point of that? We should be proud of the public housing that we have. And are we? No. And we're not. So there is room for improvement. And this is what we should be looking at. Okay, next slide, please. This touches on a few of the things that have been talked about. That's South Canberra, which is the area that we're responsible for, not responsible for, where we represent. And if you look at the right-hand side there, you can see why there's a problem for public housing here. 2015, 9% of the dwellings were public housing. In 2021, Stewart Flats have been bulldozed, Gowrie Court have been bulldozed, Red Hill Flats have been bulldozed, and those places have gone. So what's happened is that all the main public housing have been demolished, and now they're trying to put in little bits and pieces all over the place. There's no public housing at Renaissance, none at Illume, none at Chiara, and none in the parks. So that's the crucial thing. Now that's a big government policy which the developers have lent on them, and they're allowed to get their own way. And the government, of course, gets more money from the sale, or they think they do, if there's no public housing. Next slide, please. Now, these are a couple of examples. This one here, that's the Lockyer Street one in RZ1. And that's a typical RZ1, single dwellings, quite a bit of trees, and open space. Right? This is what they want to put on it. And this isn't the final plan, because they still have not put up, this is housing, the proper design for how they're going to park the car here. And this is supporting housing. Green space, well, there's a little bit round the edge, but there's bugger all in the middle, that's all concrete. Is that the sort of housing that we should be putting our tenants into? And then what about the people next door, the people who are living in RZ1? Do they want this sort of development there, next to them? If you buy a place, you want a certainty about what can be built next to it. But the final one that I want to show you is the next one, because this is really appalling. Now, focusing on these two blocks here. This is in Chifley, that's Hindmarsh Drive. This is RZ1, see all the green space there? Quite nice residential area. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'm sorry about the quality of the slide, but this came from the government website. Well, instead of two houses here with green space, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's the entrance. And where's the green space? There's none. Now, how good is that for making second-class citizens of the public housing residents? Oh, and just a final comment on this. It's a good 600 metres to the nearest shops for supportive housing. And supportive housing are all here, so they're all supposed to be disabled. Next slide, final slide now. So the present system is not working, everybody knows that, I suppose. It provides poor outcomes for public housing residents. It's not good being squashed together like things. It provides poor outcomes for the neighbours, because they don't know what's going on, nobody tells them anything. And I think what the government should consider is mandating a percentage of public housing dwellings to the large multi-storey developments. That's the only way this is going to be tackled. It's not going to be solved by bulldozing one house here and putting up 2 or 3 there, or putting 2 down there and 6 there and scattering them all around. It's got to be a bigger program than that. I've said enough.
Thank you, David. And I think we've had some quite different presentations, but really a lot of food for thought. And I'm sure that there will be quite a lot of questions, both from people in this room and also YouTube. Yeah, Bill is saying, yes, there are questions from people who've seen it on YouTube. So I'll start with the room first. Are there any questions from the floor here? Yes, actually, maybe I can actually ask you to come and sit in front.
3, 4, and maybe I'll throw another chair. I've got one for you. Yeah.
We're all very quiet. Where's the microphone? Oh, there. Do they all work?
Okay.
Right, so I think we've got first Bruce and then Barbara and Beatrice. I might come back to you later because you've already had questions before. So, and we'll get YouTube. Thanks.
Bruce Payne, thank you, Maria, for organising, and thank you for all the speakers. I'll just start with a brief statement, very brief, and I'll do a question. I suspect that there's a change in the type of housing in Canberra where it is desirable, and that applies to both private and public housing as well as community. So it's a very odd city that has some areas of very low density right in the middle of it, but that's it for the statement. Can I ask, it's probably mainly Jeff and Emma, as a result of the program that's underway, do you expect that there'll be a further net decrease in the amount of public housing in inner south and inner north? So, and I guess it really comes to my query is that the relocations that are being offered, were they relocations, in the inner north or in the inner south, or were people, as has previously happened, and excuse me if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but basically previously the relocations were from the centre of Canberra to the edge of Canberra?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Is that on?
Okay, yeah, all right. So with the current program, tenants are given a choice of region. So you can nominate a stay within the same region that you're in. It doesn't go down to the suburb level, that can be impossible to look through a particular build form, access issues. So if you're in Belconnen, you want to stay in Belconnen, that's what we'll find for you. And we can also look at other areas. We found tenants move across the city when they see a build form that is attractive and they hadn't necessarily thought of. So we have had people who've been in large blocks and, with age and access issues, were in place like all of a sudden saw a multi-unit property in Dixon, and actually that suits me better. I've thought of that before. Bearing in mind, the government has a mandate to have salt and pepper across the territory. So we are looking to keep similar percentages across the territory, which we're able to do with this program. Did I miss another part of your question? Sorry. Is that it?
I guess I'd be interested in is whether shares that view about what the possible outcome is.
So my definition of salt and pepper is a little different to the ACT government, in the sense that their argument is we need to have the same percentage of social housing in every single suburb. So that means they're increasing the amount of public housing in suburbs that are on the outskirts of Canberra, whose Whitland, Devon, Prospect, those places, right? Now, some people want to live there. It's beautiful, but many people don't. And if you are going to have an over-representation of public housing and social housing, it's going to be in the inner suburbs. And it should be, because it's close to services, it's close to communities that are established, it's close to communities that can offer support, transport, shops, all of those things. So it's not acceptable to me that we're going to have a decreasing percentage of public housing in the north and in the south. And in order to salt and pepper, i.e. by increasing in suburbs that are new suburbs that have many, many problems, even for people with money you've brought out there. No community facilities, no childcare, poor access to health. Now, it's okay if you've got a car, because you can reach your health service, but not if you're facing transport disadvantage. And then I challenge whether or not the relocation of people from the earlier rounds has been successful, because we know of the stories of people who moved to Coons. It's not salt and pepper, there's large numbers of properties in one block. People moved there who were unable to get to shops. So I'm very fearful that there's going to be a significant decline in the north and the south, and that's going to have very detrimental impacts on the people, but also the communities, because those of us who live here gain from a diverse community. I have public housing around me. I know all of the tenants in those houses. They are very different to me, and they make my life more interesting and more diverse. So that's my concern.
Hello? Oh.
Hello. Okay, my name is Barbara Moore. I live in Kingston. Now, some of this question has been answered already because we've had redeveloped Gowrie Court at Narrabundah, redeveloped Fraser Court at Kingston, redeveloped Stewart Flats at Manuka, redeveloped Red Hill development with no public housing. Is that correct, Jeff?
I couldn't speak to the
Well, somebody needs to know, because this is really tragic. So my question is, under the government's salt and pepper policy, how many social housing tenants have been relocated out of the inner south? And I would think it's thousands.
And we don't know where they went.
Nobody knows where they went?
Yeah, I don't think any of us know where public housing tenants were transferred to or rehomed. And it would be good to know.
I don't mean this in a smug way, but they're across the territory. I'm not sure I understand the question.
But it's out of the inner south, where we had really good facilities for them.
and they were always here, it was their home. And you'd moved a whole lot of old people already. I mean, this actually goes back a very long time, it's further than 10 years. The salt and pepper, because the inner areas are worth more money, the developers grab it, and the tenants are, scattered. I know some people from Griffith who ended up at Dungarland, they didn't want to go there, in a high-rise apartment.
Okay, thank you. So no, would it be possible, to get aggregate figures or anything like that about what happened to the thousands of public housing tenants who left the inner south?
Put it on notice.
I think there is a case for a post-completion, post-implementation review or report. That's the normal process of any program, and especially for a program of this size that took away more than 1,000 dwellings, moved people around, the money that moved around, the market players in this. We ought to have a complete report rather than just footnotes in various financial statements. And as part of that report, there ought to be some information around what happened to people. What about people? What happened to them? Where did they go? Are they happy? Are they comfortable? By the way, and this is just numbers and their surveys, the Productivity Commission data does cover over time tenants' responses around their satisfaction with the location and amenity and so on, and that has deteriorated from 2017 to 2021, but so has the overall condition of the top. But we had this program that, that did bring in new property.
You might add to that. I think this is the point Aquos has been making as well. It would have been very useful to, before embarking on the next round of this, to have a better understanding of what happened in previous rounds. And it would also help people to see what went well. And I know, for example, Canberra Community Law has said that they weren't as overwhelmed with calls last time round. It was different. There was more engagement. People were funded particularly around the inner north relocations. So it would have been helpful to see what went well and what hasn't gone well, but that has not happened. And I think that's why we're seeing such a terrible outcome this time.
Yes, and just on a related issue with the Mr. Fluffy houses, and we know that the government changed the policy so that there could be dual occupancies on the Mr. Fluffy blocks. And as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any evaluation of what actually happened and with those blocks. I mean, I've had a look myself, and so I know what happened to all of the ones in the inner south. But gee, it shouldn't be up to a volunteer to do that. It should really be a proper evaluation. So anyway, I think we had questions also from YouTube, Bill. Perhaps I'll give you the mic.
Yeah, please be patient with me. I'm reading these off a small screen. There's a bit of discussion about one of the properties in David's presentation, 18 Lockyer Street. You're asking questions about 18 Lockyer Street?
Oh, yes.
Is that for ACAT?
Yes.
There's a bit of commentary that maybe it should have been declared.
That's correct. That's, yes, we've asked for a review of that because we don't believe that it complies with the territory plan. Simple as that.
Move the camera the other end of that. There's another question here. It's more difficult for people being evicted from their homes why can't they just stay in place? Many of these people in the 70s and 80s and so on, is this all about the money to be made from the sale of their current homes?
Yep. Well, sometimes it's the money, and sometimes the block is going to be redeveloped. But this is the thing we don't know, and the secrecy of the housing Canberra is such, housing ACT, that we don't know why on some blocks they decide to sell and develop elsewhere, and on others they do that. Perhaps Jeff can say something.
Sure. So to decide which blocks get sold or decide which blocks are in the program at all, it's quite a complicated process. So firstly, we look at the size. So blocks need to be a certain size if they're going to be redeveloped. We have to look at the property, how old it is. So it's obviously not worth tearing down something that is sort of a viable property. The layout of the property, so if we're trying to get a lot of Class C adaptable properties, so obviously they can't be on an incline. Whether there's an opportunity for redevelopment, how many properties are already in the suburb, to try and keep the mix there. And then of course, obviously, what is the tenant interested in and where are they at in their lives? I think it's also important not to assume that remember, we've already moved 360 tenants voluntarily. So it's easy to get caught up in the sensational bits of this, but there's a lot of people who've already moved and are happy in their new locations. Going from a block, which you've been on for many years, and we understand it's a really difficult process, people have moved into places which suit them better. So there's a lot to think about when we think about whether to sell or demolish, or whether the property is going to be part of the program at all, which brings actually down how many properties we can actually consider as being part of the program.
I mean, one of the challenges with saying it's people have voluntarily moved and they're making, we don't know that people are happy because there hasn't been any review of what the outcome has been. I think is the point to make. And I think the other point to make is that many of these people did not have independent advocates and did not perhaps know their rights. And had it not been for the significant publicity that's been around this round, many of the people that have come forward would not have known that they could have got support from the likes of County Community and so on. So we don't know how many of those people perhaps would have done more to try and get an exemption. And we don't know that the outcome is as ACT Housing genuinely, I'm sure, hope it is. Now, I don't doubt there are many people who are happy. Yeah. That's not the point. The fact that some people have had a good outcome does not justify everything else that has happened in the process that has happened. And I think to rely on the instance that may have been a success cannot be used to justify the many instances of deep, deep injustice that is currently going on and impacting highly vulnerable people who have lived in these homes for decades, in really generous parts of the Canberra community, and are being repaid in the most shameful ways.
I think the issue really is the financial model. Being an ex-public servant for 30 years, when that will argue, it's the financial model that is centered around development and extracting maximum value. People come later. That's one point. The second is that there is plenty of opportunity if you are focused on the stock itself and its condition and its livability. About 30% of the stock doesn't meet the basic condition requirements. There's plenty of opportunity to pick up houses and upgrade them, totally demolish them and rebuild them, do all those things. But that's not the point here of this program. I think very strongly on Emma's point. Even if there is one person who's been coerced or forced, hasn't had representation, that's unethical. So efficiency, economic or financial comes later. All ethics needs for conduct. And perhaps, it is about time to go back to the drawing board and redesign the program.
We've got one more here.
Yes.
One here.
Yeah, okay.
This is more a comment, this one. It's the old why can't we stop the program, the rolling out light rail, I won't call it the tram, it's a derogatory term, but really. But they're saying, why don't we stop that and reinvest that money in public housing? You can take that as a comment, or you can do what you like, but that's not mine. And there's another comment about the data or trends. What was the trend prior to the 2011? That I understand from there is in a publication that's out there already.
Out.
I think that was that Carmen's, was it your presentation?
Yeah. Look, there would be, I haven't really looked at it in detail, focusing on the last 10 years and perhaps the last 4 on the program as well. I think long term there has been a decrease in proportionate public housing in Denver. We started at about 10%, and now it's sitting at about 7%, roughly that. So yes, if you start from the self-government point, there has been a decrease, but also there has been a change in the composition and the use of the stock as well. There were a lot of public servants who were housed in the dwelling, and now almost 99.1% of the tenants are in some sort of need, low income. So the program is now highly targeted compared to the time, say 2000.
There's been, I guess I've noticed an interesting dynamic on this program in that I think people see a partial fact and then just run with it. So there's a lot of data that we have on this program about tenants and the houses, and we work with it every day. So I have to say, running the client services branch, I do find it insulting that people assume that we have the worst intentions of tenants at heart. This is what we do every day. We work with 11,000 properties and 22,000 tenants every single day to make sure they can pay their rent, keep their properties maintained, live in a good community, get on with their neighbours. So I'm just curious about the intent that people think housing had of wanting to evict and treat tenants poorly.
Can I ask you one question here? How many vacant houses?
Excuse me, we are presenting Jeff as
So I'm wondering about the assumption of intent of housing. And then we get partial facts like, sorry, Carly, but your stock dip numbers are representing a particular point in time where we've had to sell and demolish properties to fund new ones. So we've picked a particular stock date. We've picked a particular stock date where we knew our stocks are going to be at the lowest. That was 2021. These are partial facts, and it's not helpful. And in the end, what we're doing is inflaming tenants who are already anxious.
And then you would like to
Sorry,
say
sir,
something.
you were going to ask something.
It's here.
I'd just like to know the transparency in terms of the number of vacant
Oh,
houses.
here's the mic.
Just the number of vacancies of housing.
Yep, sure.
In the ACT, and how consistent has that monitoring been over the last decade?
Yeah, so our target is less than 4%. For a while there, particularly in 2021, we went slightly over 4% because of the turnover of properties into this program. It's down under 4% at the moment. And it's important to think about, to just remember what that 4% represents. 1% of that is actual properties that we can offer.
The other 3% are either in a maintenance cycle or in a sales cycle. And there's not much we can do about that. So it's a really small number, and it'll get smaller when the growth review program is finished.
Right. Oh, yes, the gentleman in the red neck. Oh, is that a rabbit I was jumping?
Oh, my word. My name is Terry Christie. I am one of the housing residents in a heritage listed house in Kingston. Now, we've been there for 27 years, my wife and I. My liaison officer who's come to see me has not told me what properties are available for me if I choose to move. He will tell me that after I sign the forms to move. A further thing on maintenance. I have had maintenance on my house over the years. After the hailstorm we had recently, we needed a new gutter outside, just at the front of our house, because a hailstone had gone straight through the old rusty guttering, which I complained about and was told by housing it was fine. They replaced it. But when the guy was replacing it, he took the old guttering down and he said the fascia needs replacing as well. It's rotting. He rang up because he said, I'm only here to replace the guttering, so I have to ring up and get it approved. They said, just put the guttering up. We're not paying you to replace the fascia. So he put the guttering back up, new guttering on old fascia, and said to me before he left, good luck with that. I'll be back in a couple of years to replace the whole lot. I mean, that was the sort of maintenance that we get there. Also with the hailstorm, my fly screens were damaged. They were already there when I moved in. Housing said, we don't replace fly screens anymore. We had an argument with them about it, and finally they replaced the fly screens. It's a heritage listed house. Luckily for housing, none of the front ones were damaged. The facade stayed as it was. It was the side ones and the back ones. What did they do? Pulled the lovely old wooden ones that we had off the windows and stuck aluminium ones with 4 clips to hold them in place. Before we felt a bit secure with the ones we had, they bolted on the inside. Perfect. I've kept the old ones in the shed for when you guys did decide to sell the house, the new owner could have the option to put the old ones back. Because I stopped the guy from saying, no, I'll just drop them in the trash. That's the approach that we're seeing. And we had to fight. We got into the place, we had threadbare carpet, we had paintwork that the painter, when he did come, 10 years later said, oh, this place hasn't been painted for about 40 years. They moved the heater in my lounge room from the wall there into the hallway, one of those little square electric ones. I could see the old 40-year-old paint underneath, a big square of green paint on my beige wall, and a hole in the wall where the thermostat was.
So, sorry, your question to...
Well, my question is, why did my liaison officer then say to me, oh, the house isn't fit for purpose and it's costing too much for maintenance? When the maintenance wasn't getting done properly in the first place, then you say that's the reason why you're moving us? Sounds pretty crook to me.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, I guess the issue there is about long-term maintenance and
Yeah, why don't you do the maintenance properly in the first place? If they didn't even come out and check after the painting, I can show you spots on the wall, the paint was missed. Or they went over it once with a roller and you can still see the old paint through it. I mentioned that to my area manager. Oh, well, it's don't worry about it.
I've already had that experience in maintenance, so...
Oh, but it's every time.
If a running properties down is the real issue. The strategic objective of running properties down so you can sell them.
I don't know how to answer that, sorry.
Oh, I'm sure you don't, and I'm sure nobody in the government will either.
I go back to what I said before, if we're assuming an intent or a conspiracy, I just can't speak to that.
Well then, why are you moving every single public housing person in a heritage listed house down there out, except for a couple, one that's under the NDIS, so you've got no say over that one anymore, and from what I can gather, the other one is a domestic violence situation.
To be fair, and nobody is driving against bad intent. I haven't seen a public servant who gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to do something bad today.
No, it's their policies.
They don't. That's right. Yes, it's the policy, it's the framework that they have, and it's the funds and the priorities that the government has. So, if within that framework, and the framework here is development. That's what they're doing.
Yes.
I would not ascribe bad intent.
But one point I would make is the whole reason why the government funds organisations like Access is so that they can get feedback when things are not working. That's what we do with health. They call us. We tell them where it's not working, and then we work together to fix it. We did it with the vaccination program. We did it around the outbreaks of COVID in public housing. We've done it around child protection, where we've worked together. Why does Housing ACT not listen to us when we tell them things are going wrong so that we can work together to make things better? And that, I think, is one of the other fundamental problems, apart from there's a lack of trust also. They don't listen to tenants and they don't listen to the community sector. That must change if we want to have better outcomes.
Thank you. I think we're really, there's one last question and then we really have to finish because it's nearly 9 o'clock and I was going to have the time to yes, I know. Yes, Mark, did you, there's a lady behind you who was first and then you, and can we make them quick, please? Because we really have to wrap up at 9.
Yep. Yes.
Look, mine's just a really quick comment because I came here on a defence posting in 2005 and Canberra is much maligned, but one of the things I was really happy to see was just how diverse the community was and the fact that there was public housing in the inner south and in the north in areas that you would never have found in the city. My children went to school with kids from, it was all together, public housing, sports teams. A place like Red Hill now is becoming more like a gated community. And those wealthy gated communities in the US where you have to show a pass to get in to prove that you live there. We do have we are heading towards that sort of thing where you have to have a lot of money to live in an area. And even though the inner south is becoming richer, I think we can all agree it's not becoming richer as a community. And I think it's the sad direction that Canberra's going. And I don't mean to make this sound so, it's a sad state of affairs.
Thank you.
Hey Tim, Mark Hunt, Shadow Minister for Housing. I want to congratulate Emma and John and Khaled for having the courage to stand up and call out what is clearly bad policy. It's a bizarre universe that we live in when ATCOS and a former Labor Chief Minister are on the same page as the Canberra Liberals. But I just wanted to say very, very briefly to Jeff. Jeff, has Housing ACT and the government as such learnt anything from the rollout of what you've described as the fun part of the growth and renewal program, in that if you could go back and start that process again, would you do it differently and how?
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot, Mark. I'm not sure. Probably some stuff around the communications, remembering we did consult significantly with the sector around that, including our costs. So communications has been a challenge for some of this cohort. We'd probably go back and look at that again. In terms of the program strategy, we did take a lot of learnings from the last program, and that's why we have a tenant relocation team, how they operate. We took all the stuff around supporting people with moving and reconnection costs and utilities and skips, recognising people are coming out of large homes, have been in for a while, have a lot of possessions. It's probably around the comms more than anything. That's been the most challenging bit.
Thank you. Thank you. I think
on that note, I'd like to thank the speakers we've had tonight, and I think you've made this evening a very, I think, informative, but also I think you've provided us with a lot of issues to mull over, and I think certainly from the point of view of the ISCC, we've got a draft district strategy that we've developed. We had a survey of our community at the end of 2019 and early 2020 to find out what our community valued about where they live and what they'd like to change and what they'd like to preserve. And we've subsequently done on the basis of that and other consultations, have a draft or a district strategy. And so we'd like to actually look at that again in the context of the sort of issues that we've discussed tonight and have a look at what we need to refine in that district strategy, because we want to be ready when the government comes to us with a draft inner south district strategy that the government has put together. We want to have had an opportunity to talk to our community and be ready when the government comes with their district strategy. So thank you very much. You've been very helpful in better informing us and the community, both people in the room and also the people out there who are watching it on YouTube. And I'd also like to thank Bill again for running the audio-visual technology for us, and I'd like to thank you, all the audience here and on YouTube and Facebook, for participating in our forum tonight. Thank you very much.
Sorry.